best in podcasts, the best in town. You want to get up, get ready to get down. With its big wide sky and the wild river Thames, if you want to go, we can take you there to Great Falls, Montana.
Welcome to the greatest dam town in Montana, Great Falls. I'm Rebecca Ingham.
I'm Shannon Newth.
And we're No Dam Experts. I don't know if anyone else on planet Earth understands how giddy I am about this podcast than you, mostly because I've been harping about it for a long time.
Yes.
And the thing I want to share before you introduce who our guest is, and I've said this a numerous number of times, nobody says I want to go to the Holocaust Museum because it's going to be fun.
Right.
Nobody says...
And using the word giddy about this is a little bit of an odd way to describe it.
True.
Yeah.
But parts of our history are very difficult, and we should not be shying away from those difficult stories that need to be told because they are an important part of our community, of our history, and I am excited to learn more because we have something amazing happening in our community that has kicked off that'll allow everyone the opportunity to come and experience this story a little bit further. So it is fun for me to say that we're going to be confronting some challenging truths in this episode, and I couldn't be happier to be doing it. So, Shannon.
Yeah, this is maybe a little bit different style episode than a lot of ours, but it's important things to cover, and we are excited, just feels like a weird word, but glad to be exploring this and talking about it and to have this as something people can interact with and experience. So with that, we want to welcome our guest today, Jimmy Grant. Jimmy, thank you so much for stopping in. I do want to say that we are recording this right before the exhibit opening of what we're talking about. So you just drove in from Missoula to be with us before the exhibit opening. So when this episode comes out, this will be live and in the world, and things will have happened since then. But thank you for stopping by on a very long day to join us before you go kick off this exhibit, which we will get into more here in just a moment. So thanks.
Great.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
So let's start with the name of the exhibit, and then let's get to know you, the fella who drove from Missoula. Have you always been in Missoula? We're going to try and have some fun on the podcast. It's just not our style not to, but we're going to be talking about some big stuff. So let's start there.
Sure. Yeah. The exhibit is called Voices of Our Ancestors, the Archival Records of St. Peter's Mission School.
Big short title. Nice short title.
Yeah.
Kind of hits on a few things. The ultimate thing is just for people to come out to the museum and have an opportunity to learn about the archival records that are held at the museum, as well as the school itself, St. Peter's Mission School.
And this is happening at the History Museum here in Great Falls. And Jimmy, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, where to start?
Yeah. You can start at birth.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We're here for however much.
I mean, you can start years before birth.
Yeah.
Whatever feels like you want to start talking about.
Well, I could tell you why I'm involved in the exhibit.
Okay, that'll work.
We'll start there.
I work as a professional historian.
Okay.
My work involves, I work as a historical consultant primarily. So I do a lot of projects involving government, working with the National Park Service, working with Forest Service, Army Corps of Engineers, lots of different type of administrative histories. But we also do things like interpretive planning at museums. And so that is one of the things that I end up working on all throughout the country.
And you're curator of this exhibit, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I'll give you a little background about how this particular exhibit came to be.
Could you tell us how you got into this line of work before
curious.
you tell me how you got involved in this exhibit?
Let's back up. What led you to where you are?
So go back to the 90s, and I'm a history major at the University of Montana.
Okay.
And so
I was hoping you weren't going to say that, even though you lived in Missoula.
Sure.
Okay.
And so, yeah,
You
it's,
can
it's
guess
one of
where
those
she
things
went.
where, what are you going to do with this history degree?
Yeah.
Right.
And as I think I was a junior or senior, took a class called public history, and it was actually taught by the founder of the company that I work for now.
Okay.
And they have opened this company in 1974, have worked all throughout the country on a variety of history projects. And so we get hired on contractual basis to do different research projects.
I think that's a cool thing to do with a
It is.
history
So
degree.
yeah, I
for
took that
sure.
class. I kind of learned about the possibilities of how to get a career in history. Right. So
Are you from Missoula initially then?
no, I grew up in a few places.
Okay.
Bismarck, North Dakota.
Yeah.
So you see the Missouri River. I grew
Uh-huh.
up within a stone's throw of that. Ended up moving to Minneapolis, near Minneapolis for high school, and then came back out here. My mom had gone to high school in Chester, so
Oh,
not too
wow.
far from here. and
Okay.
Had a lot
Yeah.
of family in Montana
Chester
always.
Coyotes,
So
if anybody's
Yeah.
keeping a scorecard.
Yeah, you could have a great conversation with my mom about that.
Gotcha. And just real quick, outside of all of your history endeavors, what else does your life involve?
I got a couple of high schoolers at
Okay.
Sentinel High School. I'm a distance runner.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, that's one reason I come to Great Falls now and
Are
again.
you doing
is,
the triathlon tomorrow?
No.
Okay.
I'm doing the Ojibwe jog, which is a run out at Little Shell.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's kind of just a wellness event. So
Yeah.
Lovely.
gonna
Nice.
get my kids out there and have some family fun.
Good deal.
Good.
So
Okay.
Okay, so now how did you get involved with how'd this exhibit come along and how'd you get involved with it?
So I mentioned we get hired for all kinds of different projects.
Yeah.
Everything. I specialize in a lot of Native American history, so I work with tribes throughout the country on different projects, do a lot of work in records of Bureau of Indian Affairs. Doing a lot of forest management histories for reservations and that type
Okay.
of work. But one project in particular I was hired on was to conduct archival research associated with boarding schools. About 5 years ago, boarding schools began to take center stage for a lot of folks after there was discovery of potentially unmarked graves up in Canada at several of the schools up there. So it kind of forced a reckoning where people were wanting to know the truth, gain a better understanding of their own schools and their own boarding school story. And so we were hired by St. Labray Indian School Educational Association to conduct research on 3 different schools. And this ended up being a really big project because there were records from the different missionary orders that had operated the school. So I had to conduct research at the National Archives, a number of different record repositories throughout the country, and also right here in Great Falls. Which was kind of interesting. It's like, why are there records from these boarding schools here in Great Falls? And that's because the Ursuline Center was here.
Yep.
And right around the same time, the Ursuline sisters were going to potentially look for a new home for their records. And they were thinking to send them potentially back east to, I believe, Boston College, where they would have been housed in a repository. But they wouldn't have been accessible to the tribal communities who actually attended the schools. And so for folks looking for information about, their family's experience at the schools, they would have never been able to get there unless, they were making a trip all the way to Boston to conduct archival research. It would have been very difficult. So the sisters were looking for a place to house the records, and they ended up working with Christy Scott, who is the former director at the museum here. And the museum ended up remodeling their archival research room and are able to accommodate this archival collection. This had just happened when I was doing the research project. So they had, the records were very, just gotten there, but they accommodated my work. I think I was the first researcher into this collection when it began being housed there. So it was a really wonderful opportunity to see these handwritten records that the Ursuline sisters had cared for the past century, essentially, and open these boxes that hadn't been opened much in the past, and really start to read the stories of the people. And so it was enlightening. Of course, I thought it was a cool story. And speaking with the staff there, we all kind of thought, the public should be able to know about this.
Yeah.
As they began working, it took a little while before they kind of were able to process the records enough to have the public access available. And so they decided that, we could do this exhibit. So we talked about it and began these discussions a couple years ago now, but keeping in mind, how would this work? We decided to focus on St. Peter's because it's Cascade County Historical Society that operates the museum, and St. Peter's Mission School was right here in Cascade County. So,
And the St. Peter's Mission, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I read this, that it is the only off-reservation boarding school or school of that kind in the state, correct?
Off-reservation Catholic Indian Mission School.
Okay.
So there was, I think the Ursuline sisters were involved in about 10 different schools.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that number, but it was close to that. It was quite a number. But all those are located on reservations, so they serve distinct communities. So there's St. Labre, which is among the Cheyenne, and St. Xavier with Crow. But here, this was originally it had been established to serve the Blackfeet, but then they established a different mission school on the Blackfeet reservation. So this school is unique in that it served kids from a lot of different tribes. There's Métis and Chippewa, Cree. There were Cheyenne kids, Blackfeet kids, Gros Ventre, Assiniboine. The list goes on and on. So kids from many different communities were sent to school here and actually attended this boarding school.
And St. Peter's Mission doesn't exist in its totality today, correct? It's still got a church out there, and it's all on privately owned land by someone else.
Yeah, there was a series of fires ended up closing the schools. The last fire destroyed the girls' school, I believe, in 1918. And after that, I think they held onto the land for a while and eventually sold it off. The Ursuline sisters did. Meanwhile, there is a piece of property, which is the original chapel, that is still, I believe it's still potentially owned by the diocese, but I'd have to check on that. But so there's historic structures out there and then ruins of the actual buildings, but it's not open to the public.
No, you can stand alongside the road and stare at it. I
Well,
mean, we
you've
are getting
been
big about
there.
that. Yeah, I had a really unique opportunity during COVID. There was a arts project that included Philip Auberg and Megan from the Great Falls Symphony, and they composed music for 3 different mission churches and then went and performed that music. And the owners had opened up their land so that we could go to the mission and have Megan perform the piece that was created for that St. Peter's Mission. It was an amazing experience because it's a small church, committed people who are trying to keep it from falling apart. I wouldn't say keep it structurally sound and safe, but to keep it from falling apart. And there was a lot of good history about St. Peter's Mission there. And when I was out there, your friend and mine, Lisa Herodes, who sits on our board, shared that her grandmother went to school at St. Peter's Mission. And I'm like, well, that is interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we frame it as its history. You don't think people who would have gone to an Indian boarding
more
school
removed than that.
and
Yeah.
it's not really that long ago because I'm not that old yet. So I do know people who either went to the Indian boarding schools in our area or had parents or grandparents that went there.
Absolutely. And Lisa's on kind of our advisory group for this particular exhibit.
Oh, nice.
And one other kind of connection is that Bishop Fleming is going to say Mass out there this weekend.
Oh,
okay.
Because the Little Shell Powwows this weekend as
Yeah.
well. And so I thought it would
Interesting.
be kind of with the opening of the exhibit
Yeah.
as well as, just a lot of people in town. I think just a good community thing.
So there's so much information connected to this, I assume. I haven't looked at the archives. How do you take and distill and then create whatever the exhibit is?
Absolutely. Books could be written on these subjects. And I think that's one reason why we really wanted to focus on just the one school instead of all of the entirety of the collection. The Ursuline Sisters collection does have information to mention about maybe 10 schools. So it is a vast collection of material. My research prior was just conducting work on 3 different schools, not St. Peter's. But focusing on this way, we're able to narrow it down a little bit. Maybe someday we'll just do a massive exhibit and tell the rest of the story. But even on just St. Peter's alone, there's so many subjects. I mentioned the number of tribes that attended, a lot of characters who worked at the schools out there, the boys' school, girls' school. So yeah, it's a big story.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Can we maybe back up a little bit or provide a little more context or historical information about
what it is?
Yeah. So I think I'm aware of this term now of boarding school and a little bit about St. Peter's Mission, a little bit of the Ursuline, just because I've been in the community for a while. But I think I would reckon most people don't.
I think they hear boarding school and they think high income net worth people who send their children around to be snotty and wear cute uniforms and ride in Corvettes with other boys.
Yeah.
It's not the case.
Right. And so I think maybe can you explain, I guess, what a boarding school is, and then also back up and this confluence of how did the Ursuline sisters get into the boarding school business, and, and how were the tribes? Why was it the tribes that were the ones that they were, catering to or offering this to? Because there's a lot of varying history with this. I think there's this now negative connotation, which for good reason we could get into, but there's also the Ursuline sisters who have done other good work as well. So just there's a lot of things happening here. So maybe let's go back to the original, the basics of how it all got started.
Just tell a story now, Jimmy.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big story.
Yeah.
So I'll do my best. I'm on the spot here in the podcast. But, no, it goes way back to federal policy.
Okay.
And federal policy at the time, President Ulysses S. Grant is called the peace policy. And the peace policy was to try to bring about assimilation, as opposed to, at the time, this is the Battle of Little Bighorn was happening, and the flight of the Nez Perce, and there was conflict in the 1870s and early 1880s that kind of was part of what was happening. The cavalry was out here in Montana and the Dakotas, and this was kind of I guess a theater of war to a degree. So the idea with the peace policy was to assume control, a forced assimilation, and it was done primarily, the peace policy, right? But it was done primarily by eliminating food sources, intentionally eradicating bison from this land, and that was a big one. Because then people were starving and then became dependent on rations. Of course, the series of treaties, and this is Blackfeet territory in this land, and so there are different treaties that reduced that territory several times, and so then the missionaries had come out in the meantime, really wanting to spread the gospel essentially, but also building relations with the different tribal nations and so forth. How did that fit in, you ask? Well, then the education program had developed over several decades prior to that, and they had been experimenting with boarding schools, essentially removing children from the culture. So by I don't even know, I don't want to throw dates out here, even though I'm a historian. We like to throw out dates.
It'll be at the exhibit.
Come out to the exhibit. There is a lot of this information, but ultimately there was essentially a forced education program where students really didn't have much choice. Parents would be forced to send their children or risk losing their rations, and they became dependent on rations because the bison were eliminated. Part of the way we set up this exhibit, we do introduce that forced starvation and talk about a particularly harsh winter in this area of 1883, 84, the starvation winter, as it's known among Blackfeet, where the eradication of the bison really started to impact people, and the rations were, there was mismanagement to a degree where they didn't order enough rations. People were starving. A huge percentage of people died of starvation. Meanwhile, that's the same year that a lot of the kids began going to St. Peter's. And in some ways, that was kind of a mechanism of force to have people send their children to where they could actually be fed, or at least it was perceived that they were going to be fed, because there were certainly some starvation happening at the mission school itself. which is a whole other part of the story too. But so that's the context of what the boarding schools were. I mean, they were a tool to destroy tribal culture. And as the individual stories, we also know that other people were really dedicated to want to come out and, bring salvation to the people, right? So there's multiple truths happening, and we don't try in these exhibits to pass judgment on the multiple truths, but we want people to see what was going on and try to see it from different perspectives. Put yourself in the perspective of a child who's sent away from your culture and your home, or, put yourself in the perspective of somebody who's like trying to work, to make sure people are fed or whatever it is, to just learn about this history best you can.
And I think it's interesting to, and I'm very interested to see this exhibit and what the Ursuline records show as well, because there's their whole perspective as well, right? For what they were doing and different intentions or thoughts, I'm sure, on what they were doing there and how they were teaching and why. So I'm curious to see that. Do we see in the records representation of multiple perspectives, or is it solely from Ursuline sisters' perspective?
It's definitely from the sisters' perspective. And this is one of the things, that is a challenge with conducting research. Part of the situation with St. Peter's in particular, it closed in 1918. So a lot of the oral tradition, that may be passed down to the stories, we don't have any living witnesses, and tribal history a lot of times is oral tradition. And so people sharing, their information that they were told by their grandparents. And so we know some of that, and we incorporate voices of some descendants who, with quotations and so forth, in addition to the archival records to help tell the story at the museum, as well as memoirs from students, and then recorded oral histories from students too, which are also archival records where we were able to, hear the story of individuals, Métis children that came from Lewistown or other people who, and we profile other individuals too, and who attended the school and learn about what their life was like afterwards too. So try to have a mix of voices in that respect, or mix of sources. But I do think that with the records, it is a challenge, knowing that it is only the teachers or the religious who are providing the records, but you can read between the lines too, and kind of get a sense of, hey, they're not really talking about these people very nicely or whatever. And then, you all of a sudden start to get a picture of, maybe they weren't really sensitive to some of the needs of the kids, or maybe they were really close. And that's the thing that's super complicated, is that we have records of graduates of the school who speak of their lifelong friendship with some of the sisters, where, that 60 years of friendship, and almost they were the parental figure for them, and cared for them, and saw their successes later in life. And, so it's would be a mistake to, all of a sudden assume one thing, even though you see it right away, but then you're like, maybe there's more to the story. And that's really the complicated nature of history is really the exciting part of history, in my opinion, where you can really see these many threads. It's not simple. So,
when you talk about the Ursuline sisters records, I'm picturing like a ledger, like.
You're picturing it correctly.
Okay, so like
yes.
this page is for this student, and I'm just they checked in this day. This is what they brought with them. This is what we fed. This is what we've shared. This is what we've taught. Those kind of things.
Yeah, well, the records, I guess I could kind of summarize some of the main records that are in this collection.
Yeah.
There are what we'd call they're either called the house diaries, or the annals. And those are, each day by day throughout the length of operation of the schools. I mean, there are some breaks in there, but those things, they're amazing. And you can oftentimes, especially when some of the teachers may have been dealing with hardship at the schools, you can get some personal voice coming out. It's not just an institutional record. A lot of times it depends who the author was, and you can't always tell who the author was, right? It was a different staff member sometimes, but some people were very diligent. And of course the handwriting changes, and You
You
get
can
pretty
see
good
that.
at reading cursive in this job.
Oh,
Cursive from a long time ago,
Yeah,
which is even
old-timey cursive.
yeah, it's a challenge, but you start reading it really closely, and then you can kind of get different voices start to emerge. And but that's a common record.
Okay.
There's also ledgers. So a lot of these schools, one thing it mentioned, it's government policy. So they're funded by enrollment numbers,
Okay.
and so this is part of the federal Indian policy at the time. So, you can't separate the work of the sisters there. It is the reason that the school is built, is established, and it's really how it stayed operational. In fact, I think after the government started no longer funding private schools or religious schools, then the Jesuits left. Because they essentially gave up the mission, focused their work elsewhere. The Ursuline sisters then continued the mission and
so
kept
is
it going.
it then funded by the Catholic Church versus the
Yeah,
government?
and a lot of private
Okay.
donations. So they were constantly looking for funding and trying to keep it going. So
Interesting.
Huh. Yeah, I worked this is completely not the same. Let me first start there. But when I worked at a hotel, we'd have a daily log. So at each shift, you would write the notes summarizing what happened on that shift. And then the next person, you could just keep kind of a running log of what was going on. So you knew problem guest in this location. So I'm equating that simple experience to the kind of house logs of trying to keep a tone and temperature of what's happening so everyone was kind of on the same page.
And there was, a lot of editorial comments, in there. So it is interesting. So that's one of the main sources of records. The other ones, like I said, these other ledgers that are the enrollment records, which they would use for funding, are extremely valuable genealogical resource. They will say, the child's name, age, tribal affiliation, when they enrolled, if they left, if they, ended up leaving the school, for whatever reason, if they died at the school. So those are really impressive lists that are going to be a great resource for the communities that attended the school and their descendants now who are really interested in, who is this person? Who is this family member? Did they go to the school? It'll help answer those questions. And I did have a few people who I've known that know that I'm working on this, and they're like, "Hey, could you look for this relative?" And I've been able to answer some family questions for people that have been mystery for 100 years.
Oh, wow.
So, it's been a really interesting project in that respect.
It's interesting to me that, the Ursuline sisters held on to all of these records to start. Are there any gaps in years of information, or is it a pretty complete history?
I can't say for sure with St. Peter's, but within the individual schools, there are gaps.
Sure.
So I mentioned I worked on behalf of St. Libre to try to investigate some of the student deaths that had happened at the school there. And there was big gaps in some of the records, and it may have been from school buildings burning down or whatever. This is pretty common as historians. We do encounter gaps in records when it is oftentimes like a fire or whatever it may have been. So there I wouldn't be surprised if even at St. Peter's there are some gaps.
And my understanding in talking with Ashley at the History Museum and just learning a little bit more about this is the Ursuline sisters wanted to have these records preserved outside. It came time a few years ago where they say we want somebody else to have these and hold on to these, and that they ended up staying here in part for accessibility. My understanding is right now it's the exhibit is on display, and then you can schedule for specific descendants, things like that, can schedule further look into the archives themselves. Is that correct to your knowledge?
I believe that is going to be kind of a phased rollout.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think originally it was they did accommodate projects, similar to what I had worked on.
Where you go into the research center.
And then some tribal historic preservation officers, I think, may have come in and taken a look at some of the records for their communities.
Yeah.
And then tribal descendants, and then I think they're eventually in the near future going to be able to fully open this to anybody who's interested in learning.
Yeah.
And conducting research. I think that's going to be just amazing. The sisters, when I've spoken with them, they've been so supportive of this effort. They really want to bring transparency to the work and recognize, a lot of the pain that the boarding school system had caused and their role in it. And just, more or less own up to that and just allow people to come and read and see the stories of these schools and their communities and their families.
Is this your first time curating an exhibit?
No. So, so we do go way back. I worked at a tribal museum before I started HRA, the company I work at now, Historical Research Associates. I was a museum educator at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum.
Okay.
That's the largest tribal museum in the country. So I would assist with all kinds of different, exhibits that we'd have there. And then, of course, before that, I was a national park ranger.
Nice.
So I did small little things in the visitor centers.
Which park?
Grand Teton National Park.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, I worked out at originally my first job there was working out at a general store and a ferry boat operation.
Nice.
It's no longer running. I went there this summer. But I used to operate this ferry boat across the Snake River. And they used to have Missouri River ferries that operated the same way. They'd be angled against the current and go back and forth. So, so that was an interesting start of the public.
You're old hat at this.
That was the start of my public history career. And then I went to grad school and then worked at the Tribal Museum before about 20 years now, working as a consultant on these types of projects. So we develop museum full build out of I think we've done 6,000 square feet exhibits that are all interactive and really many year projects. So some of them are big scale, some of them are small though, and everything from mobile apps to interpretive signs you might see along the Lewis and Clark Trail or the Nez Perce Historic Trail. We've done some of those. And
wow. Cool. So what in your research on this particular exhibit regarding St. Peter's, anything stick with you, stick out to you? I mean, you've got a little bit of an extensive background in doing some of this now, not just with Indian boarding schools, but kind of across the gamut of history things, which are always interesting. Is there any one thing that sticks out?
Yeah, this one, I will say that the work with the Indian boarding schools is some of the more emotional work and really the heavy work. I mean, these are children that we're talking about, and what sticks out to me every time is their names. You look at these kids' names and you can really start relating this. See the writing in the archive. And these mention these journals, these house diaries or annals, and they talk about this child's name and the experience, and then you kind of follow them. Then they come back in the story, and you just can relate and you imagine their experience and the challenges they were facing. And sometimes it's really exciting to see what they may have gone on to do in life. If they did survive, the resiliency that they must have endured, some of these children. I mentioned lots of people had lots of different experiences at these schools, and even people individually may have had multiple experiences. Maybe they had lifelong friends, right? But at the same time, maybe they cried themselves to sleep at night. So it's a complicated story, and it's a really personal thing, for individuals. So,
what ages were the children that were in these boarding schools?
The youngest were about 4 years old.
Oh,
was it both male and female, or just female students?
No, they had separate boys and girls schools. And at St. Peter's, the siblings would maybe get to see each other once a week. So the boys would come over and visit their little sisters or older sisters or whatever it may have been, about once a week. There's that. I saw that in the records, and I thought, "Oh wow!"
You're at the same school, and you only get to see your sibling maybe once a week. That's interesting.
Yeah. The other interesting thing that they operated a school for white settler children at the same time. So there's they call it just for girls, but they have the Indian girls school, and they had the school for the white settler children, and I think it was mostly a day school. But I'm not sure.
That same property?
Completely segregated.
Okay, yeah.
So school segregation here in Cascade County, which was pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Interesting. Was there anything else that stood out to you or you found as trends in food or in educational subjects or in behaviors that were noticed or anything like that you noticed throughout the diaries or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were some really tough times when they didn't have enough food, and people were. I mean, it was very lean, and they were starving. The staff and the children. Of course, the staff were there voluntarily. I mean, they had a choice, and the kids did not. Right. So, it was some very difficult times. Sometimes they didn't have enough fuel to fire their furnaces, and it was too much snow and too cold to send somebody in the mountains to go harvest timber to firewood to bring back. So they had some really challenging times.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of hardship, and we live in an easy life today, I think, comparatively.
Well, and across the board, you look at any kind of elements of this story, even if you weren't in a boarding school. Like I think of the Lewis and Clark expedition. I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have. You look at Stagecoach Mary's story.
Yeah.
Nope, couldn't have handled that. Like,
Yeah.
we're
Well, I
so
tell you,
soft.
Stagecoach Mary makes a lot of cameos in,
I was gonna,
in these archives.
I was going to ask you about Mary Fields.
And
Yeah.
Mary was remembered by a lot of the students in their memoirs and oral histories too. So knowing her story, I was just paying attention to her name whenever it popped up, and I think all the primary sources in the archives do support everything you've heard probably.
Yeah.
But, just what a resilient and tough person that she was.
Were the students, the children's remembrances of her mostly positive, or
Absolutely,
what was that? Okay.
yeah. They I guess she was really great with the kids.
Yeah.
From what I can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I'm thinking about this exhibit and going later this evening to experience it, there's so many levels to this story. And as someone who has no connection to that I'm aware of to any person involved, whether it's on sister's side, children's side, any of that, I'm thinking through, just my brain is thinking about so many different levels, from like the faith religious community, from Native community, from the time. There's so much to process and think through. I imagine that this exhibit is meant to do just that, to get you, not necessarily lead you to a specific conclusion, but to get you really thinking. Is that accurate description?
Yeah. Absolutely. We really want to just kind of spark curiosity in our audiences and recognize that we're not going to be able to uncover the whole story. This is really scratching the surface, and try to give clues that again make it relatable, the experiences, but just hopefully encourage people to want to learn more. And it's equally, like I mentioned, it's equally about telling the story of an archive as it is telling the story of this particular school. And so it's kind of balanced throughout the exhibit. You'll see that this is really about this archive and what history can tell us, and what a fascinating way to do that by guiding you through this kind of school experience here in Cascade County.
And it seems some of this, the timing of this is just, and I say timing of this, not just this specific exhibit, but looking at within the last 5 to 10 years, more articles and coverage and just interest in boarding schools. And it seems some of that has just come from the release or availability of more information. Yeah. Do you think, from your perspective, why do you think this is becoming of more interest now to learn about all sides of this story?
Sure. Well, I mentioned 5 years ago with the identification of these potential grave sites, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Department of the Interior commissioned a massive study where they identified over 900 confirmed student deaths. The Washington Post conducted a follow-up on that, and they confirmed over 3,000 student deaths. And these are children who actually died at the schools. There's been a number of other smaller investigations, including the investigation commissioned by St. Lebray itself, to really want to know its history and find out what actually took place. And so that was a really beneficial thing. Just to kind of tell you a little bit about that without getting into it, that very few students died at St. Lebray, St. Xavier, or the other school we studied, St. Charles. And that's because they were on reservation and sick kids could go home. That was policy, is if children were really sick, they would send them home. Now here at St. Peter's, it's not that situation.
Yeah.
So number of children died. The purpose of this museum exhibit is not to account for all that, but that is a reality that is evident in the records, that students did get sick and die at the school. They just lack of immediate medical care in a very remote location can be attributed to it, as well as just some other difficulties.
Starvation.
Yeah, tuberculosis. Just a lot of diseases that stricken the people in that area and at the time.
Jimmy, is it normal for some of the archives to be accessible or even exist for some of these boarding schools, or is this kind of unique to the sisters?
This is something that a lot of times the best archives are the most accessible archives. To me, to be able to go to the National Archives or the Montana Historical Society and be able to conduct research, it's open to the public. A lot of these records are private records. So a lot of them that may still be in the custody of certain religious orders, they just don't have necessarily the ability to just create a public research room above and beyond all of their other missions. So it's more or less those internal records that are, maybe on a shelf or in a storage room somewhere.
Okay.
Or records that, my work ended up bringing me to the subject boarding schools that I was studying, where they still have some records in their offices and file cabinets and that sort of thing. Or I conducted records here at the diocese and other places where people have records that you want to keep, and so you can keep your history and know and be able to refer to things and understand what was going on. And so not all of them are accessible. Mostly people will accommodate you, but it's not something that's, where
You can just show up and there's a research room.
I think it's that would be just a huge burden. I have some records at home. I don't know if anyone, that type of thing, or at our office where it's, I don't think you need to come. So I get it. It's not that we're not hiding anything, but at the same time, it's just, that'd be a big process to organize your records and make them publicly accessible sometimes. So this is an amazing asset. And it's really speaks to the good work that the History Museum is doing. They've remodeled their research room to accommodate this. And the other thing about archival records is it's a needle in the haystack unless they process the records, unless they take inventory and create finding aids and truly make them accessible. And that's the work that's behind the scenes. So you hear about the sisters transferring the records to the museum, and that's just one step. But to actually make these a functional thing for the public is a much different thing. And the thousands of hours of staff and volunteer time producing these detailed finding aids that include, synopses, abstracts of each school and some of the history behind it, file title level descriptions of what's included in a file. And, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of files. So it takes a lot of work.
Wow.
And of course, certain records are so fragile that the public really shouldn't be handling them. And so the museum has been scanning a number of records where then they can, allow people on site to kind of be able to flip through some of the images and access them that way.
Wow. And go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. That's a side note.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, do you know how long the exhibit is open or up until?
Mm-hmm.
As of right now, I was speaking to the director.
No end date?
It's going to be about a year long.
Okay.
It is intended to be a temporary exhibition. So it'll be, just occupying the main space, exhibit space in the museum. So it's going to be about a year.
And there's festivities tonight with the
Yeah.
opening that whoever's listening to this podcast won't have gotten to be a part of. So it was a blast.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a great success.
Yes. And just you mentioned earlier, but Christy Scott, the former director of the History Museum, just want to give a shout out to her too, because she's really dug in. She's into the Ursuline sisters, and she's done a lot of research on the sisters and was an integral part, to my understanding, in helping kind of keep the records in Great Falls and not get them sent off to Boston to make them accessible. So just a huge shout out to Christy for her work on this too.
Absolutely. And Christy's been just a great resource throughout the planning of the exhibit, and actually assisted with, providing some of the material culture that is featured in it. We have, for example, an actual bed that was in one of the girls' dormitories on display in the museum, where you can look at the historical photograph of the dormitory and see that bed in front of you and really get a sense of what life was like for a child brought away from their home and, into this institution, essentially. And so things like that where, she was able to really kind of work closely with the Ursuline Center to get these items on loan, which is really going to add a lot of depth and kind of, experience to what this exhibit does and allows us to kind of feel things in different ways.
Well, Jimmy, thank you for your work on this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
I know fun isn't the right term, but when history gets to unfold in front of you and you get to see portions of that history in a story format, to go, oh my goodness, there's so much there.
Sure. Yeah, and this, this is a big story.
Yeah.
And it's obviously a story of here at Great Falls, but it's a national level story, and to have that on display here at the museum, I think is going to be a real asset to the community. And hopefully people will take it in and start to think about their own histories and, their own family's experiences that really brought you to where you are today. So I think that's really important.
Well, thank you for fitting us in.
Yeah, thank you so
before
much.
your big debut tonight. It's been an honor and a pleasure to get to hear from you about the work you've done, and thank you for doing it. And folks, until we see your bright, smiling, happy, healthy faces in our fine city, we do hope you're creating amazing memories with your friends and family, and we hope to see you at the exhibit at the History Museum soon. Bye.
We are no damn experts as the recorded claims from Great Falls, Montana, covering what you need to know about this amazing damn town. Damn, that felt good.